Falcha, welcome back to Irish Granny. This is part 3 of Asia Raden's wonderful book, Stoned. We last left our story with El Inca in Peru. In the valley of Manta, there were emeralds, and there was an emerald as big as an ostrich egg. It was worshipped as a living goddess, and people brought it gifts, and the only gifts that they were allowed to bring it was emeralds. And so the place where this was kept was full of gigantic, beautiful emeralds, quantities of them. When the Spaniards came and killed the Incas, they took all the emeralds. But the Incas had hidden the biggest one, and it was never revealed. They tortured them for 10 years before they told the Spaniards where the mine was, where these big emeralds were. The Incas believed that silver and gold were the sweat of the sun and the moon, and pretty, but not valuable. But emeralds were alive with a piece of God's flesh, and that was because they fluoresced in ultraviolet light. And when you took them out, oh, I'm sorry, I'm distracted. There's a gigantic, beautiful, beautiful rainbow right outside my window. It took me by surprise. It's been pouring all morning. So, sorry, back to the Incas. So the emeralds fluoresced outside, and they believed that this was the light of God. And a really greedy friar named Reginaldo Pedrosa convinced the soldiers that real emeralds would not break. And the soldiers tried to break the emeralds, and they broke because, spoiler alert, emeralds do break. And so they were really sad. And so the friar, after the soldiers left, picked up all these pieces, which were still big chunks of emerald. And so now he was wealthy. And he smuggled them to Panama. And as a result, when he died, they discovered that he was smuggling these emeralds, and they sent them to Isabella. And the Spanish thought, oh boy, emeralds, they're rare, we want them. And now we know where to get them. And they believed no big problem. The Incas were idolaters and pagans, and it was okay to just take their stuff. See, God said it was okay. So off they went, and interestingly enough, both religions worshipped the same green god. So they found the good mine after 10 years of torturing everybody, and then this indication that these emeralds really did exist. And when the how do I say this? When the Spaniards went back, they had to figure out, like, where did they come from? What was the source? So we've got the emeralds that they actually have, but where did they get them out of the ground? They had to find the mine. And interesting how they found them. A chicken was cooked for dinner, and when they opened this chicken up, they found emeralds in its stomach. And what you might not know is that chickens have a crop. It's like a little bag inside their body that they collect little rocks, gravel, and it helps them to digest their food. And these chickens happened to be hanging out by the mine and had all these emeralds in their crop. And, you know, the Spaniards realized, where were these chickens eating? And that's how they found the mine. And so they, with the help of the plague, they killed off the Indians and took this mine that they called La Trinidad. So in 1563 was the Great Affliction. It was the worst of times, and there was all this plague and fighting and unrest. But 1564, they realized, oh, the chicken has the emeralds in her guts, and we're sitting on top of a gigantic emerald mine. And the Spaniards believed that God had delivered them. So there was no really good way to keep track of the wealth that was pouring into Spain, but Ferdinand and Isabella's grandchildren and great-grandson poured money into the holy wars. I mean, there was so much money they couldn't keep track of it, no way to calculate. But as generations went by, their grandson was having all these holy wars and wars with the Netherlands and in the Mediterranean and against the Protestants and against the Muslims. And they reached a point of stalemate where they weren't getting enough cash flow fast enough from these boatloads of jewels and Incan treasure. I mean, it's really tragic what they did. They melted down, jewelry and statues and artifacts from the natives, and just for their precious metals and stone. So basically the Spaniards were bankrupt and had to declare bankruptcy many times to get loans, waiting for shiploads of treasure to come. So what they had was a cash flow problem, and they needed credit. They were running a budget deficit. They actually created the modern banking economy. See here, the European world, the bank, I can't read my handwriting. They established this system called Juro. Probably not pronouncing it correctly, Juro, maybe it's Juro. It was the first World Bank, and the interest was charged, and they would pay a bond, and it was basically the ancestor of the Treasury bill. They were hoping and betting that there'd be no storms, there'd be no pirates, that there'd be no trouble in the colonies, and they were betting futures. So this financed the rise of capitalism, and Spain became the only superpower in the 16th century. And eventually, so many diamonds came from the New World that the value of diamonds started decreasing. Where am I here? In the book Jewels, A Secret History, Victoria Finlay cites the 1652 first-hand account by English lapidary Thomas Nichols of the rapid depreciation of emeralds as they became abundant. Nichols' account concerns a Spaniard who showed a jeweler an emerald of an excellent luster and form. According to Finlay, quote, the jeweler valued it at 100 ducats. Then the Spaniard showed him an even larger, finer one, which he valued at 300 ducats. The Spaniard, drunk with this discourse, carried him to his lodging and showed him a casket full of emeralds. The Italian, seeing so great a number of emeralds, said unto him, Sir, these are well worth a crown, about 1/8 of a ducat apiece. Now that is rapid currency deflation. So with market saturation, there became an overabundance, prices fell, Spain collapsed from chronic deficit spending, the mines shut down, the wealth did not increase anybody's standard of living. So all this money, all this treasure was pouring into Spain for so long, several generations, and it went into fighting wars and financing the lives of the highest nobility. And you had this battle going on between religion and money, Catholicism against the religion of the Incas, Catholicism against Protestantism, the worship with emeralds of the religion of the Incas, helping to fund the wars, the religious wars against Protestantism and Muslims by the Catholics. It was just this weird round robin of religious weirdness. In the 1530s, a guy called Paracelsus, that was the father of alchemy, he invented toxicology. And he was a doctor, a scientist, a botanist, a chemist. He said he was the first to recognize that what was called miner's disease, miners would die, was the toxic fumes from mines that were trapped under the earth and not vengeful spirits. He was the one who came up with the notion, the dose makes the poison, and that a little tiny bit of something may not kill you, but a lot of it might. He equated scarcity with value and with wealth, and he said that too much would destroy the economics of the situation. So now we are finally on part 2. We have done want, now we're doing take. Obsessions, possessions, and the mechanics of war. What does a jewel represent? It's a form of adornment, but it can also be worship. Chapter 4, the importance of being famous. Revolutionaries require a spark. And the spark that began the French Revolution may have been what was called l'affaire du collier, the affair of the necklace. This story is fascinating. I really know very little about pre-revolutionary France. Just have never really read or studied Marie Antoinette and that whole thing. I learned so much from this book about it. Marie Antoinette was in this affair of the necklace. She was charged with embezzling state money, subverting the king, seducing and plotting a cardinal to get a necklace, and none of it was true. She had actually refused the necklace for a couple of reasons. Eventually, the real thieves were revealed, but the damage to the queen's reputation was done, and it helped feed the anger of the people and led to the French Revolution. Not the only thing, but it contributed. Marie became a symbol of Versailles and autocratic excess. She was called Madame Deficit. So she was born the 15th of 16 children, oh my God, November 2nd, 1755 in Vienna, in the Habsburg Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Her mother, Maria Theresa, had 16 children and used them as pawns on the chessboard of Europe, not unlike what Queen Victoria did with her grandchildren later. She was an enlightened absolutist. She believed that monarchy was absolutely necessary, but she was enlightened enough to free the serfs, and she believed in universal education. Marie Antoinette was never taken seriously. Her older sister died of smallpox, and as a result, Marie Antoinette ended up being moved into her position on the chessboard, and she was married to the French Dauphin, who was when she was 14 years old, and he was sort of a dolt. At the border, because the French and the Austrians had two completely different cultures. The Austrians were more austere and sober and no nonsense. And the French were all about appearances and frou-frou. So at the border, she was stripped of all her possessions, her clothing, her pets, her companions, her keepsakes, and made to be truly French by changing everything. But it didn't work. Vienna, the court, power was what was important. And they wore respectable clothes. And Versailles, wealth and showing it was what was important, by the height of your hair and the size of your jewels. It was a culture of conspicuous consumption, a lot of gossip, a lot of intrigue, a lot of very bored, wealthy people. The True Housewives of Versailles. I hate those shows. So every morning, she was dressed in front of a dozen strangers. They watched her and her now husband eat. They had no time to be alone. She complained about it because she wasn't used to it, and she lost all respect in the eyes of the people in the court. Her mother wrote to her frequently and advised her to be French and to stop sneering at Madame du Barry, who was the court mistress. The king's mean girl sisters got her to insult Du Barry, and that put her in bad stead with the other noble people. It was her job, her mother said, to please the king and, well, the Dauphin at the time, and to spy with pillow talk. She was called l'Autrichienne, the Austrian, but that could be changed with a letter or two to l'Autrichien, spelled slightly differently. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, which went from meaning the Austrian woman to meaning ostrich bitch. So that's what they called her. Louis XVI, the descriptions of him are not particularly flattering, but they're pretty funny. So let's look at that for a second. Where's my glasses? Here we go. Louis XVI was by every account a really sweet guy and not much else. He was described thusly by a contemporary courtier. Quote, there is nothing haughty or regal in his bearing. He gives the appearance of a peasant waddling along behind his plow. He had no interest in, nor aptitude for, ruling a country. His social skills were limited, to say the least, and strangest of all, for his notoriously libidinous family anyway, he seemed to have no interest in girls, least of all the exceptionally pretty and charming girl he just married. His main focus, other than the obligatory hunting parties, was his obsession with locks and key making. Seriously. Louis confided to his grandfather that he was in love with his new wife, but just needed more time to overcome his timidity. In the beginning, his grandfather, who was himself a notorious horn dog, insisted that everyone leave Louis alone about it when the marriage went shockingly unconsummated. But the marriage remained virginal for over 7 years, well after Louis XV's death and Louis XVI's coronation. Whatever the actual source of the 7 years dry spell might have been remains a mystery. But according to renowned biographer Antonia Fraser, Louis XVI did indeed have extraordinary sexual problems, and they were the subject of vicious gossip, both in Versailles and in Paris. Was he gay? Was she? Was he impotent? Was it her fault? Everyone knew that Austrians were frigid. The speculation, the rumors, the gossip, all of it was very similar to the level of intrusive scrutiny that celebrities endure in our century. When Louis XV died suddenly in 1774, 4 years after Marie Antoinette's arrival, the still virginal teen queen was crowned along with her socially awkward husband. He quite ominously was quoted to say, quote, protect us, Lord, for we are too young to reign. No shit. Things immediately started going downhill. Only a few months later, the first of the famous bread riots would take place in Paris as starving peasants assembled to demand help after yet another disastrous harvest. Stuck in a passive-aggressively hostile foreign court, trapped in a humiliating public spectacle and a failed sexless marriage, with all with her mom breathing down her neck via the post, what's a lonely 15-year-old girl to do? And her response as this unhappy teenager for just a couple of years of teenage rebellion is what painted the picture of her for the rest of her life. She was disliked. She was called barren and frigid, and a failure to Austrians as a spy, a failure to the French as a queen. So she partied for about 5 or 6 years. She shopped. She rebelled. She rebelled between the ages of 16 and 22, and that's where all the rumors and stories come from. But she got pregnant, and she turned into a good wife and a mother and became a charitable and very harmless person, but the damage was done. The French hated her. She had been a horrible teenager who wasn't. And when she had her first child, she totally settled down to the simple life. But there were so many cultural differences between Austria and France. Austria, the royal family, was private. In France, it was considered a required public spectacle. The Austrians were plain, the French were ostentatious. The Austrians revered authority, the French glamour. It was like the difference between DC and Hollywood. The working class and a functioning government were predominant in Austria. And in France, there was complete social and economic inequality. All the institutions were antiquated. There was a small privileged elite with huge wealth for the very, very, very few. Sounds familiar. Beginning with the Sun King, Louis XIV, so this would be the last king's grandfather, Louis the 16th and Marie, there was just Marie Antoinette, there was just this dysfunctional aristocracy that was completely out of control. And there's a story about her having shoes that fell apart the first time she wore them, and she bitterly complained to the shoemaker. But he said, "But Madame, you walked in them. They were meant just to look at. They weren't meant to actually be used as shoes." Let's see here. What have I got? What the court of Versailles was like. This is terrible. Small peasant children were kept in elevated chambers fitted with tiny holes in the floors. Those starving children were tasked with trampling fine white flour down through the holes so that it would powder the wigs of the beautiful people as they walked from one room to another. The last king and queen had seen a series of long, bad winters and short, damp summers. Very little was harvested, and what did come up was moldy and often had to be thrown away. Livestock froze, people starved, the plague ravaged peasant villages. The third estate may as well have been the third world. This is the people. And all the while, a new industry was burgeoning, an industry we would come to know as the tabloid media. Brand new companies operating out of London and Holland circulated crude political cartoons that exposed secrets and exploited and often manufactured scandals. So in France, they had the first estate were the clergy, the second estate were the nobility, and then there was everybody else. And we know that the fourth estate is the press. So for most of France's history, the three estates and their rigorous hierarchy had been the accepted order. But in the 1780s, after the last three generations of monarchs had taken the French culture of economic inequality, dramatic spectacle, and conspicuous consumption to increasingly deranged and dysfunctional heights, and that warped culture was exposed and exaggerated by this new tabloid media, brewing dissatisfaction would at last explode into open dissent, and they really raked her over the coals. Marie Antoinette was a consumer and a supporter of the arts. She was not involved in government at all. She had no interest in government, and once her children were born, she settled down and she was a patron of the arts. She had this place built called Le Petit Trianon, which is a small palace. It was an idyllic recreation of a rural village. It cost a lot of money, and it was done in the spirit of Rousseau, who inspired the chic, simple life. And she actually wanted to retreat from the glitz and consumption and everything of she grew out of it. She grew out of Versailles emotionally and psychologically and retreated to Le Petit Trianon, and she secluded herself, which was a total disregard for protocol, which once again did not invite the nobles. This once again did not endear her to the aristocracy. She abolished public gawking at the royalty and started wearing simple clothing and very, very simple jewelry and not wearing the big hairdos, and keeping up and surpassing the Jones was the whole big thing, in France at the time. Like an arms race, a race to be better than. And people spent more than they could afford, and there was a lot of bankruptcy and debt. And how to keep up when your role model, the queen, had suddenly turned simple and was, going back to the simple life. They didn't like that. It kind of took their main form of entertainment away. Why would they kill Marie Antoinette? She was not in charge of the government. She was in charge of nothing. She had no influence over any policies or anything at all. But she was blamed for the economy. She was blamed for the climate change that wrecked the harvest. These tabloid newspapers, tabloid publications were scandal rags, and they made horrible fun of her. They invented all sorts of damaging stories about royalty. And of course, there was political motivation behind all of it. They treated rumors as fact. This is starting to sound familiar. It should. They reflected the bad opinion of the Republic. They were used to manipulate public opinion. They made criticism of the monarchy okay for the first time. And it was called pamphlet literature. They did crude, obscene cartoons, and they were vicious and libelous. And there's one in the book which I won't show you because I don't want to get in trouble with YouTube. But if you get the opportunity to look at this book, it's got some fabulous pictures, and I love books with pictures. It's got a whole section of, where did it go here? For heaven's sake. Here we go. See, photographs, and I mean, just a huge section of colored photos, and they're great. So the queen was accused of all sorts of things: blasphemy, incest, treason, perversion, godless, money grabbing. Maria Theresa, the wife of Louis XIV, so this would be the king's grandmother, said, "Oh, let them eat cake." She was the one who said that, not Marie Antoinette. She was a very callous and ignorant woman, known for that. Marie Antoinette was actually kind, and I don't get the impression that she was exactly a social worker, but she wasn't callous like that. These rags made the monarchy ridiculous and flawed and worthless, and Marie Antoinette became their favorite scapegoat. And this just created an explosive culture of anger and contempt towards royalty. The peasants felt that she was mocking their way of life by using this simple lifestyle, and the aristocracy felt that she hated them. She did. And Louis XV had ordered a $2,800 carat diamond necklace for his girlfriend, Madame de Berry, but he died before he paid for it. And Marie Antoinette didn't want it. The jeweler was desperate to unload it. Nobody else could afford it but royalty. But to her, it symbolized the king's, the previous king's whore. That's what she called her, and wanted nothing to do with it. So now the story starts. Jean Saint-Remy, Countess de la Motte, had married into minor nobility. She was on the fringes of Versailles. She wanted to get close to Marie Antoinette. Cardinal Rohan was on the outs for bad-mouthing Marie Theresa, the one who said, "Let them eat cake." And, oh, I'm sorry, not that Maria Theresa. They all have the same name. Maria Theresa, the one in Austria, Marie Antoinette's mother. So this guy was an Austrian cardinal. And he bad-mouthed Maria Theresa, and he bad-mouthed Marie Antoinette. And he was a fame whore. He was desperate to get into the inner circles of Versailles. He had been sent over there because of Marie Antoinette, you know, some sort of liaison, and he could see that she wasn't popular. He wanted to be popular. He wanted connections. So Jeanne Lamotte kissed up to him and got him to write to the queen. She convinced him that the queen had the hots for him, the cardinal, and got this cardinal to write letters to Marie Antoinette, which Jeanne Lamotte answered. Of course, Marie Antoinette knew nothing about this whatsoever. Jeanne Lamotte destroyed the cardinal's letters and answered them with her own letters, and he fell for it. She convinced the cardinal that the queen was hot for him. She arranged a meeting with the queen, and she found a prostitute who looked like the doppelganger of the queen, and you know, secret in the dark at night, passed her off as the queen to the cardinal, and he fell for her. So Jeanne Lamotte talked him into buying the necklace to give to the queen. So the cardinal bought the necklace, and the jeweler was delighted because he had no one to, you know, couldn't unload it on anybody. So this cardinal bought the necklace for the queen, but he paid with an IOU And he was gonna, he didn't really have any money. And the fake valet that Jean Lamotte sent as the Queen's valet arrived at the Cardinal's place, and the Cardinal gave this gift for the Queen, and the fake valet took it to Jean Lamotte, and she took the whole thing apart and sold all the stones abroad. And the jeweler, meanwhile, starts asking Marie Antoinette for payment on this necklace. And the story he's been told is that that it was being bought by the Queen. The Cardinal got it for the Queen. And the plot became uncovered, and the Queen became absolutely enraged. And the King put them on trial to show the world how innocent and mistreated his wife was. But the whole entire thing backfired, and the trial became a gigantic public circus. The public believed that Marie Antoinette had slept with the Cardinal and gotten him to buy this necklace, and embezzled the money and stolen the necklace, and forged notes that were believed to be from the Queen were presented. The trial became about the Queen's character and reputation, and it was a mess, and it was sort of put the lid on that coffin. In French, the word bijou means jewels. Les bijoux indiscrets is the are the terms used for women's genitals, kind of like we say family jewels. The Queen was accused of having seduced and embezzled and manipulated and destroyed, and poor Jean was presented as this tragic heroine who had been tricked by the Queen. And in reality, Marie Antoinette was a fiscal conservative, and when told that her charities were short on cash, she told the jewelers, the royal jewelers, to stop making jewelry for her and to sell the diamonds and to use the money for the charities. Nobody knew about this, but that was what she did. She was also a sexual conservative. She loathed Du Barry because Du Barry was a prostitute in her eyes. She was the other king's adulterous affair. Because the Queen was seen as frivolous, from this bad journalism and from her past, the whole story of the necklace was believed by the public. She was condemned forever. She was even accused of other jewel thefts while she was in prison. She was imprisoned, and then she was accused of stealing jewels while she was in prison. And the whole thing dominated her trial before she was executed. The necklace was 2,800 carats, or 647 diamonds. It went to the waist and the elbows. It was a wearable chandelier. It came down from the neck. There was a choker, and then it had all these layers that came down, and it went down to the elbows and down to the waist. It was impossible to assess the relative contemporary value of it. Too many variables in the context of time and place, but nevertheless, it was quite valuable. So there's two kinds of envy. There's benign envy and malicious envy. Benign envy is when you admire something and you wish you had it. And malicious envy is when you admire something and you wish the other person would lose it. Jean Lamotte had benign envy of the Queen. She admired what the Queen had and wished that she herself had something similar. The revolutionaries had malicious envy. They wanted to take what the Queen had and destroy her whole situation. So after this l'affaire Collier, the affair of the necklace, 1786, the French crown defaulted on loans, and in 87 the king had a complete nervous breakdown. In 88 there began this bickering between all the levels of government, all the people, all the nobility, and the clergy, and unrest. It was just absolute unrest. In 1789, the king shut down a meeting of the Estates General which was the meeting that they would get together and vote, the leaders, and he just shut the whole thing down. There was so much discord. And late that year, the Third Estate, the representatives of the ordinary people, renamed themselves the National Assembly. Marie Antoinette tried to pick up the reins for Louis, who had a breakdown, but she had no education and no experience and didn't really know how to do it. The National Assembly wanted a constitutional monarch. She had to vote on this because Louis was unable to, and she said no because she thought that the monarchy was the only thing holding the country together between order and chaos. She mobilized troops to keep the mob out of the city and away from Versailles out of fear. And it was viewed as an aggressive coup on the part of the monarchy against the people. And at that point, the Bastille, the big prison, was stormed. And this is when I started feeling an uncomfortable sense of déjà vu, to borrow a French term. July 14th, 1789, the people stormed the streets of Paris and liberated the Bastille prison. The massive, miserable, crushing symbol that in Bourbon France, they were all prisoners. It was hardly the extent of what they did or would do, but bringing down the Bastille was a symbolic victory over the government's absolute and unquestionable authority. 10 miles away at Versailles, Louis XVI was awakened at 2 a.m. by the Grand Master of the Wardrobe and told the Bastille had been taken. The governor, Louis XVI, was informed, had been murdered, his head carried on a stick through the streets by the enraged crowd. When Louis asked, "Is it a revolt?" he was allegedly told, "No, sire, it is a revolution." The press were declared free, and a new wave of vicious papers, very violent, very pornographic, and divorced from reality, were put out there. Approximately 2 weeks later, a mob of 7,000 women marched to Versailles and, in an unprecedented event, managed to gain access to the palace as they tore through Versailles looking for the queen, killing guards and aristocrats, ignoring the various treasures heaped around them. They had their mind on a single goal. When the women, some covered in blood, arrived in her room only moments after she'd slipped away, they took their pikes and knives and other weapons in hand and stabbed her bed over and over, just in case she was hiding in the mattress. Ugh. So Jeanne Lamotte escaped prison. She had been in prison during this whole thing with the cardinal. She escaped dressed as a boy, fled to London, and wrote a book. And the book told more lies about the queen and the necklace. Marie Antoinette became the sacrificial lamb that bound all levels of French society together against the monarchy. Most of the necklace stones disappeared forever. 22 of the most famous ones were made into a choker for the Duchess of Sutherland. The crown jewels were stored, the French crown jewels were stored, but that was broken into and they were never found except the French bleu. And the French bleu we will talk about next time. So this is the end of part 3. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back soon. Slungafoil. Time for me to take a little break.